Lebka. Very good.
Oh, it is Alex. Oh, wonderful.
Oh, good.
All right. And it will give it takes about a minute to get going, and then I will introduce you. Come on, what's the matter here? Lebka. Very good.
Oh, it is Alex. Oh,
Oh,
wonderful.
good.
You
Yeah,
appear
I
to
just
be,
got in, Ben. Thanks.
you're streaming.
Okay, here we are. So, Alex Lebke, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, can you turn on your camera? That would be
Certainly.
helpful.
I need to get a picture of me driving. I'll be
Oh,
stationary more in a moment.
that's fine. Okay. I've had lots of shows with people who are on the road. Okay, I think we are now, let's see, are we stream live? We're on live on YouTube, so I will introduce you right now. Let me get a microphone closer. And we'll talk about an hour, okay? Hi, I'm Meta Spencer, and today is the day for us to all worry about the Antarctic ice sheet. And fortunately, I have some of the greatest experts and most concerned people who are really working on that issue. And we're going to have a good talk about the opportunities and the possibilities of saving that ice and what is going to happen to us if we fail to save it. I'm happy to introduce first several people, all wonderful, extraordinary people in the world. Vinton Cerf is, I think he's in northern Virginia right now. He's an American internet pioneer, and actually was told, I was told that we must recognize him as one of the fathers of the internet. So it's an honor to meet you, Daddy. Great to have a conversation with the father of the internet. And in Michigan, I suppose you are, is Robert Axelrod, who is a distinguished university professor emeritus at the University of Michigan. And I did not need to be introduced to him because I used his book, The Evolution of Cooperation, as a required text for the courses that I taught on peace and conflict studies when I was a professor at the University of Toronto, teaching peace and conflict studies. So his work has been very important in my own history, and I'm grateful to have an opportunity to meet with him. We have also a dear friend, Peter Wadhams, who has become a friend of mine in the last year or two, because I kept calling on him to be part of the series of conversations that I have been holding about methods of reversing climate change, restoring the climate, and doing various kinds of repair. Also called, if you don't mind blunt language, geoengineering. We've had a number of shows and conversations, like maybe 15 or 20, about various techniques that have been proposed, but not one about the technique that's going to be discussed today. So this is a new one. We're breaking ground. And I don't know where Alex Lebke is, but he is on the road someplace driving a car. And all I know about you, Alex, is that you are, people said they need to have you here for technical reasons and to explain any of the technical issues that may have come up. Because what we have here is a conversation about a new proposal, I believe, to try to preserve Arctic and Antarctic ice sheets that are, of course, melting under the global warming. And there is a proposal, and you folks have been working on it together for some time. So I'm going to ask, if you will, Professor Cerf, will you please give us a little history of how this project came about and what you're up to?
So I haven't been Professor Cerf in a very long time, but thank you for the honorific. My colleagues, Bob Axelrod and Alex Lupke, and I and several others have been meeting for about a year or maybe a bit longer, specifically discussing the possibility of preserving ice in the Antarctic and potentially in other places where glaciers have formed. Our interest in this is based on the understanding that some of the ice is sitting on ground, except that warm water from the oceans has sneaked in underneath, is eating out the glacier from below, creating a kind of a lubricating layer. And in the case of the Thwaites Glacier in the western ice shelf in Antarctica, it's accelerated its sinking or slipping into the sea. We look at the situation with some concern because if this process accelerates, we may get a catastrophic change in the amount of water in the ocean over and above the ocean rise caused just by warming of the ocean itself. But this could be potentially catastrophic. So the question is, can we slow this process down? We don't see this as the solution to global warming. We only see it as a way of postponing a potential hazard, serious hazard, while we try to figure out how to get either carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere or at least putting less of it in. So this is an adjunct thing. We're at the point now where we have met once with about 40 glaciologists at Stanford University in December last year, looking at several possible interventions, one of which we have been focused on, and that's to drill holes in the ice, for example, in the Thwaites Glacier, pump the water out from underneath, drop it back down on the ground, turn the ice into snow to increase albedo. Of course, we don't have enough physics data to find out whether this is feasible or not. And so our current focus is to figure out how to get a project going that would let us get the data to figure out whether or not this intervention makes any sense at all. We have another workshop meeting coming up in September in New York to review the potential ways in which we would govern such a project, because there are many people who have an interest in this, including native local indigenous people, and of course others who would be affected by it. And
Sorry, we're talking only about the Antarctic, though.
No. Actually, we although our focus of attention has been on Antarctic, we're actually now discussing broader possible interventions in the Arctic regions, whether it's Greenland or Iceland or Alaska.
And so we any indigenous people in Antarctica, but plenty in Greenland, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And there are people who have strong feelings about interventions like this, even if they are not living in the area. They have a concern about this kind of intervention. Mm-hmm. So I've taken up way too much time here. I want to just emphasize.
Mm-hmm. It's really necessary. And I guess the first time I heard about the proposal was an article in, I think it was the Atlantic. I'm sure you're familiar with that. And in fact, I will be interviewing some of the people who were engaged in or were interviewed for that program. Is there a general common understanding about where the matter stands, what you need to do next, how much permission you need to proceed, and so on? How iffy is this business? Is it just a pie in the sky, or is it something that within 6 months you could start doing it?
Well, not within 6 months. I think Alex and Robert probably could say more specifically, because that's what we're looking into in this next workshop, is who has to agree, who has to help support, because this is an expensive intervention just to get the physical data, let alone actually undertaking a true slowdown effort. So there's still a lot of work to be done before you could even begin to do the engineering to gather the data to figure out whether or not this is going to work. But let me ask Alex and Robert if they'd like to opine on that question.
Well, I can hop in. Yeah, there are two things that have to be done in parallel. Obviously, the access and the permissions to make sure that everyone is very comfortable with the type of data we're going to be gathering and the type of experiments we're going to be doing. And so, again, this continuing work on the regulatory, political, indigenous people. There's a lot of people who have very valid and important voices to make sure that as the science proceeds, that we're doing it thoughtfully and carefully. We certainly don't want to cause more damage than we would hope to sort of intervene. In parallel with that, the engineering has to happen. So the designs of these systems, the modeling of these systems is quite complex system dynamics. And so that work has to proceed in parallel. It'll probably take us several years in order to do the designs, in order to gather some of the basic data before we would even ever touch foot, let's say, in Antarctica. And so we have a few years to get all the people involved on board and supportive of the type of work that we would want to do. In parallel with that, we'll prepare all of the needed equipment and systems to make sure we can gather data effectively and safely.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Professor Axelrod.
Well, and we're facing three challenges. One is to get the permissions, including from indigenous people for whom glaciers are not just utilitarian, but they have spiritual meaning. Another challenge is to deal with the argument that Vince raised that if we're working on ocean rise, does that mean that we take away money and attention from emissions, which is the real key to the climate change? And our response is, well, as Vince said, we're buying time to deal with that, but we're not dealing with the causes of climate change. We're dealing with trying to mitigate one of the effects. Another challenge is to raise money, at least to do the preliminary testing, as Vint was describing. And the problem there is that the foundations and philanthropists who are engaged with climate change are usually more interested in these emission type things or way of dealing with carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, or sunlight, and have less interest in ocean rise. And so that's another challenge for us. And of course, ultimately, there's the engineering challenge of finding out, as Vince says, whether it could be done. So we're facing all that, but we're trying to proceed, and we have certainly gained a lot of traction among glaciologists. In fact, the whole discipline, due to our work and some other work by others, has changed from a discipline of glaciologists, which used to be just measurement and modeling, and now is engineering, doing something about something that they've only watched and modeled until about 2 years ago. And so that's been very constructive.
Well, we did have one conversation with a man named John Moore, who wants to put up some sort of underwater barrier, like a sheet of some kind.
They call that he calls it a curtain, Meta, as I understand it. And that's another interesting but very ambitious intervention proposal.
Well, Peter Wadhams was on that conversation. And if I recall, Peter, you were not, you didn't display much enthusiasm for it. You know, your expertise in ice is exactly relevant here. I think somebody should back up a little bit and tell the audience a little bit more about what this intervention would do. Exactly how does it work, and why do you think it might succeed? What's the basis for doing it? I believe what you want to do is pump water from under the ice up to the top of the water, up at the top of the ice, and where it'll refreeze. But the water underneath is what leaves it slippery. Can you explain that, or somebody, maybe
well, no,
Alex?
You just summarized it very well. The real question we have is, how many holes would you have to drill? How fast would you have to pump the water? How long would you have to pump it? The idea is to drop the glacier back down onto ground where its rate of slipping into the ocean would be reduced. And again, that it's not a measure that stops anything. It just slows down the process, buying time, we hope, against the possible catastrophic failure in which the ice slides out and the rest of the western ice shelf goes with it. None of it will happen overnight necessarily, but we have seen situations where the slow process has suddenly accelerated, and a significant amount of ice has been released into the water. The important part here is that it's ice that's on ground. And the reason that's important is that that does lead to real ocean rise. Ice that's already on the water has already raised the water as much as it's going to, given its weight. But
Mhm.
ice that's on ground causes a much bigger hazard.
Mhm.
So what we
So-
need right now, of course, is better data to understand whether the physical dynamics of such an intervention is feasible.
Has
Either,
anybody ever done anything like it? First of all, I wonder why there's water under there. It's a
well,
weird thing
first,
idea. I don't understand it, but how much, apparently a large part of Antarctica is floating and maybe Greenland too. Why is it there? And how much damage will it do in terms of ocean rise
well,
if it all, I'm
if
asking too many questions all at once. Sorry.
yeah, well, if Thwaites goes, there's about a half a meter of sea rise that is potentially at risk. If all of the western ice shelf goes, now we're talking more like 3 meters. Alex, have I got those numbers correct?
Yeah, that is exactly right. And so, if you think about 3 meters or 10 feet of effective global sea level rise, it's pretty significant for a large portion of the planet and the impact that it would have on lots of coastal populations.
To answer your other question, Meta, the British have been drilling on the Thwaites Glacier for quite a while, mostly for scientific reasons, pulling cores in order to examine the history of the ice and climate and other Paleozoic features. They haven't been drilling for purposes of doing the kind of measurement that we're interested in, but they know how to drill, and that's helpful for our preparation and planning. And they've gotten permission to do that as well on that ice shelf. We're looking at earlier data gathering in more easily accessible places like Alaska or Greenland or Iceland before we make an intervention on the Antarctic ice shelf.
Because one thing, it's not going to be easy to do, but this article in the Atlantic indicated that it would be an expensive and extremely challenging operation. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely true, especially in the Antarctic, where the weather at best during their summer is pretty tough, and the winter is even worse. However, it's a focus of attention because that has a potential major threat because of the amount of ice that's on the western ice shelf.
Let me add that the curtain idea that you mentioned is another one. There was in the Atlantic article. It's certainly another approach. We in our group, I think the pumping approach seems more promising. But we stay in touch with those folks, and we don't mean to be competitive with them. But let me mention two more challenges on the engineering side. One is you want to not only drill, but you have to make sure that it doesn't freeze over, that the shaft doesn't get frozen. And second, you need a lot of energy to do this pumping, and you don't want to burn diesel fuel to man the pumps. So there's various possibilities of getting that, but that's another challenge.
Well, what are some of the possibilities?
Well, there's two obvious ones. I
you're
mean,
not
one
going
is
to you're not going to put up solar panels, I think. I don't know.
yes, that's not probably very effective. The other one that has been suggested is you do a wind farm out offshore, and you have a cable bringing the electricity to the pumps. Now, I don't know if that's practical, but that's
Or local winds. There's a lot of wind in Antarctica, and so you can imagine
wind,
each pump
yeah,
has its
and
own
wind.
wind
Yeah,
station
I'm
there.
sorry. Yes, wind is good.
Okay. Peter, what do you think about all this? Oh, another question. First, I'm curious about already, of course, there will be opposition before you even open your mouth. And I've run into it every time we do a show about anything like climate repair. The taboo word geoengineering is uttered, and then the game is over. You've lost. But to be very fair, the people are concerned about possible negative effects. And for many of these possible interventions, there are realistic reasons for wondering. I think the main one being water. If you spray water up into the clouds, it's got to come down someplace, and maybe it's going to come down where you don't want it to, and maybe it's a bad deal. But it looks to me like I can't imagine what harm could come from pumping the water up from under an ice sheet, how that's going to affect anything in the rest of the world. What do the worst critics say might go wrong that you would regret having done this?
To be honest with you, I haven't heard any serious criticism of harm caused by this, other than some argument about disturbing the pristine Antarctic ice shelf. But the one thing that one might argue is that the energy requirement is so severe that the side effect of doing the pumping is to create more global warming problems. The point that Bob made about using diesel fuel or something would certainly generate a heck of a lot of carbon dioxide. This same group has spent some time much earlier looking at a variety of other energy sources that weren't polluting, at least not atmospherically polluting. One of them was small modular reactors. But I don't think we're close enough yet to having such an option available to use it to do the pumping.
The major criticism has really not been about the side effects of this, which are modest at most, but the distraction argument we've talked about, that this is distraction from of lowering the effects, lowering climate change itself. It's a mitigation of one of the effects. And some
a moral hazard argument.
Exactly. But we think, as Finn says, that it's a matter of buying time.
Well, again, we haven't committed ourselves to anything other than getting the data that we would need to see whether this is feasible, how much energy would be needed, how fast would you have to pump, how frequently would you have to pump.
And the other generic criticism is about the taboo word of geoengineering. And when you talk about doing things to the ocean or the atmosphere, that's understandable, and the side effects are very hard to evaluate. But in this case, putting some extra snow on the top of Antarctica, for example, is not a major side effect that you have to worry about. It's not spreading itself around the world, for example.
Well, in fact, if anything, it helps, because we know that the loss of the ice is causing a serious potential hazard. So adding more ice to the top and increasing albedo seems like it would be a good thing, not a bad thing.
And that's why we prefer to call our project ice preservation, to emphasize that we're preserving something. We're not messing with something.
Okay.
So I'm actually quite interested to know what Peter thinks about all this. Given your background, you must have an opinion.
Well, I'm getting confused, actually, because people have been talking about the eastern ice shelf and the western ice shelf, and these are two different entities, and which is the one that is the real concern?
Well, the Western Ice Shelf is the one that holds the Thwaites Glacier, and I think Pine Island as well. That's the one that we're most concerned about, because as Alex has often colorfully put it, the Thwaites Glacier is acting like a cork that's holding much of the Western Ice Shelf in place. And if that glacier goes, then there is a hazard that the rest of the ice will eventually go as well, contributing to a significant amount of sea rise. And of course, it's not just the absolute sea rise that's the issue here. It's also the storm surge and other kinds of effects that occur, on top of which we have the other effect, which I'm sure you're well aware of, and that's the Gulf Stream. In the Arctic, we're concerned that the introduction of a lot of fresh water may interfere with that extremely important Gulf Stream warming effect, and that could create what we remember, or have at least have recorded information about the Little Ice Age that occurred in the 1600s in Europe, because that particular warming current slowed down for a couple hundred years, and that led to a lot of serious problems there. And that, of course, is an Arctic problem primarily.
Let me hop in with a distinction between Western and Eastern Antarctica. So Western Antarctic ice is ice that is sitting on land that is below sea level. Eastern Antarctica is ice on land above sea level. So as we have rising ocean temperatures, right, inevitably those hot ocean water is going to eat away everything in Western Antarctica because that is ice below sea level. And so that's the big concern, Peter, why we want to work on that first. Eastern Antarctica has a phenomenal amount of ice, but it's not as much of an impact due to ocean temperatures rising. So as Vint mentioned, if we lose the cork of Thwaites Glacier, all of those warm ocean waters will rush into the center, effectively, of Western Antarctica, and will it's a tipping point, right? Once you lose that central pathway, there's a channel there that goes into Western Antarctica. You're not going to be able to hold the oceans back. The ocean temperatures are going to continue to rise, and it will eventually decimate all of that ice. And that's why Western Antarctica is the first focus. Does that make sense between Western and Eastern now?
Okay, yeah. So I can see that, and that also implies a sort of acceleration effect on the ice, which means that you're dealing with potentially very rapid changes, indeed. And how do you see? I mean, do people see how that is likely to play out in terms of how long it's going to take and how fast will it go?
Mm.
I would say it's unknown, right? This is a very new area. It's quite complex and it's very difficult to predict. There is a lot of interaction and ice dynamics that is happening. Some people, imagine that if we lose the Thwaites Glacier, the cork, then nothing is really effectively going to stop the oceans from decimating Western Antarctica. No putting the cork, back in the bottle, so to speak. So, there is those concerns, but we don't really have enough data to really predict that, to say the timing, how quickly it's going to happen. I'll go back to one other question I think Meta had asked earlier, is that this has been seen before. The Cam ice shelf some 200 years ago was moving quite rapidly in Antarctica because it had water underneath it. And then all of a sudden that water drained, probably through natural causes, right? Just there's a lake or under there and it drained naturally. And that ice shelf stopped and has been stopped since then. And so what effectively it is there's the thermal balance between the ground that it's on and the ice. There's an amount of heat transfer that happens naturally. But once it starts moving, it generates its own heat through sliding friction, right? Dynamic friction is a much higher energy event. It produces on the order of two times the amount of effective energy at that surface. So once it starts sliding, it won't stop. It's self-propagating. And so the idea is that if we can stop, even for a brief period, the movement, it'll go back to its static state and we'll stay there and will remain fixed again. But these are all only theories, which is why we really need to do the research. We need to do the testing. We need to experiment and understand, as Vint meant, how many holes, how much water, what is that heat transfer rate, and really understand, build these models and see if we could maybe stop these things from moving and put them back into stasis.
So it's Vint, just to jump in on one point that Alex is making. The thing that we don't want to place a bad bet on is the potential for a catastrophic failure. It's the tipping point question, which remains open until we have better data. Many people think we're already past the tipping point for Thwaites. Others have different tipping points to be worried about, notably the carbon dioxide concentration at the moment, which exceeds what it has ever been based on any of the data that we have now in our history. So, the big concern, I think, is the tipping point problem. We would like to move the statistics back to the point where we are not at the edge of a tipping point, buying some time to deal with the problem in the atmosphere. Oh, by the way, just speaking of atmospheric problems, I was just introduced to another interesting problem that we, or effect that we may be seeing. You know, we've been putting a lot of satellites into orbit thanks to Elon Musk and SpaceX and others who have similar aspirations. And eventually they tend to burn up. And their products are showing up in particulate matter in the atmosphere, in the high atmosphere. And it isn't clear what all the side effects of that are going to be, whether that produces, you know, weird kinds of sulfuric acid rain, or whether it darkens the atmosphere and then perhaps reverses the warming effect. We don't have any data at this point, just the observation that there is a layer of particulate matter that we didn't used to have that's showing up because of satellites burning up.
Mhm.
Yes, that's a good question because I worked quite a bit on the Greenland ice sheet on the Kangalusuk ice shelf, and there you're dealing with black ice, and that and when you analyze that black ice, it's actually smoke from ice sheets and glaciers and uh, fires in
Yes.
the whole area, and that's a pretty frightening thought. Well, certainly when you look at that ice and you walk on it, and you sort of see that that is not ice. It's ice, but it's not ice. It's gunky stuff.
Yes,
Uh,
exactly.
what's what is that going to something like that going to happen in the Antarctic? And if so,
You put your finger exactly on the albedo problem. It's shifting the albedo significantly in the wrong direction. And the worst part about all this is the cyclic effect. You have global warming, you dry out the, well, let's see. You have global warming, it creates additional rainfall because there's more water that can be held in the warmer atmosphere. The rain falls, all kinds of plant foliage grow like crazy. Then you get to the dry season, everything dries out. Then you have fires. The fires produce more particulate matter and smoke. And then it rains again and you have landslides. And then it starts all over again.
But I don't think there's that much forestry in the southern hemisphere, is there? It would be fires from, oh, I don't know, Australia or someplace that might wind up in Antarctica, where it would be fires from Canada that would wind up in or Siberia that would
Yes.
wind up in on the Greenland sheet. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm not arguing that it's affecting Antarctica. I'm just speaking
Yeah.
generally of what the side effect of the fires is to produce particulate matter that ends up in the north anyway, in
Yeah.
the ice, as Peter is pointing out, and that has its own set of side effects.
Well, you guys are like most people, judicious and sober-minded and not impulsive. Whereas I am somebody who thinks, well, if there's a good idea and it sounds right, let's start doing it right now. And I want to see what the real effects would be. Now, what I would wonder is, if you take all this research that we want to do first, modeling and measuring and all of that, it's very appropriate, I'm sure, but isn't there anything that could be done in terms of a small scale pilot experiment? Can you find a little island that's got an ice sheet on it, and go see if you can pump some water and what happens? I mean, it'd be good to have a real life effort to begin doing something.
Well, wait a minute. Pumping water only makes sense if the ice is on land and the land is below sea level. Otherwise, it's not clear this intervention makes any sense. Second, until we have some solid data, we have no idea how much it's going to cost to intervene. And whatever we do, given the scale of the ice sheets, not only in Antarctica, but elsewhere, it's going to be a lot of money. So rashly just going off and doing something without having a better model for what the effects are seems irresponsible.
That's what everybody says, but I think you have to look at what kind of emergency we're up against and how fast this stuff is moving. If the sheet is is slipping off real fast, you don't have time to play around with experiments or modeling. And so that's all I wonder is how you don't know how fast it is, right? Peter, how much time do they have?
Well, it's impossible to tell. But I see the point. And well, I question this um, speed of drilling holes to get to get to get enough melt going on. I think that's perhaps the nub of the problem. How do you estimate whether you're working or not, whether it's working?
Well,
Well,
Peter,
go ahead, Vin.
I want to just remind you that the British have been out on the Thwaites Glacier drilling holes for a while, so they know how to do that. It's a hot water arrangement.
Yes.
So they haven't been doing the kind of measurements that we're interested in, but certainly the ability to drill holes in the ice is well understood. Alex, were you trying to say something?
Yeah, so here's my comment. Tim had his question. We could absolutely do some work right now today. It is absolutely urgent. We don't know if we've gone past the tipping point. We might already be in a mess. And so there's a lot that we need to discover. We need to learn how to pump the water. We need how to clean the water. We need to learn how to distribute the water. We need to learn how to provide power in these remote areas. So there's a phenomenal amount of work that we should be doing immediately in order to even be able to get to the final answers that we're looking to answer here. So there is no time to wait. And we should be funding some of this research immediately and starting to do this work. Now, the work can be done, as Vint was alluding to. It doesn't have to be done in Antarctica. And there are locations in Alaska and Iceland and in Greenland where we can do that work. We do need to find a place that will allow us to do the work. As you mentioned before, people are just terrified of any kind of interventions. Granted, all we're doing is gathering data, and all we're doing is we're trying to learn, and all we're doing is some engineering. And so it's a non-risky type of research that we want to do, but we have to start doing it, and we're ready to do it immediately. We know what we want to do. We know the data we want to gather. We know the systems we want to build and start testing. And effectively, we have teams of people who are very interested in doing that and doing that immediately.
So the reason we're having this workshop in September is, in fact, to lay out what kinds of actions we have to take in order to get permission to do these things, and under what governance principles we would proceed. So that's an important step ahead of doing anything in particular.
And we've been
We've
been very aware that some other projects have failed because of not getting appropriate buy-ins from the people involved. The one in Alameda and the one in Sweden in particular.
Yes, those are two good examples of what I would say let's see, I would say, I'm looking for the right word here, but it's sort of unjustifiable reactions to, I would say, very innocuous proposals, like putting some seawater into the atmosphere to see whether or not it would increase the albedo. That goes on all the time in the normal course of events, except nobody's ever bothered to measure it before. That's what these people were trying to do. But somebody stopped them because you didn't ask my permission. So we're very conscious of this kind of silliness, and we have to do something that defends against it. And that's why we're looking very carefully at our governance process.
Well, it's also important to have a conversation with the indigenous people in the area who feel strongly that it's their homeland and it's their right to veto it. And a lot of my friends even agree with them. I don't, but I don't think anybody has a right to veto anything at this point because it's such an urgent matter. But then I am a hothead. So I guess what I wonder is, when we were talking a year or so ago about doing an experimentation on Hudson Bay, and the reason for choosing Hudson Bay is this would be for marine cloud brightening. The reason is that Hudson Bay is entirely within Canada, and therefore, if the Canadian government okayed it, there shouldn't be that much need to get consent from other Arctic countries. Whereas almost every other place that you might want to do some experimentation, you'll have to you're in country not any one country's sovereign territory, but a place where you need to get global consensus. And I think getting global consensus is very unlikely. I may be wrong, and people say so, but
Well, could I just suggest to you
yeah.
that there are at least 3 places where you could expect some kind of more local permission? Alaska is one, Iceland is another, and Greenland is a third.
Okay. Good
Yeah,
idea.
actually, I was thinking about Iceland because there is a conference in Iceland happening in is it October, and which everybody goes to nowadays, and that might be an ideal location to to carry out
Mhm.
a study and have a lot of people working on it. Um, and so I think that would be a distinct possibility. I'll be going there myself, in fact.
Well,
Mm.
Hopefully, we will have some representatives from our group at the Iceland meeting, and we certainly will be in September in New York.
Well, that's another thing I was going to mention to you. I did a show just Monday with some other people, and one of the things that was brought up is that there is going to be some effort to get some countries together to talk about the kinds of consensus or the kind of international negotiation that needs to be done to get the authorization. What is appropriate? And I think the Australians are interested in sending some people to that conversation. I was asked to find out whether or not Canada would like to send somebody to the UN. And maybe you're talking about the same meeting that I was told about. I don't know when it is, but I think it might be the same meeting to talk about the international law or the way what has to happen in order to authorize any kind of further experimentation.
Well,
Um,
I think you need to distinguish between those interventions that have global effect, like seeding the atmosphere, where every country is directly affected, and it's very hard to predict where the drought will be and where the extra rainfall will be. For that, this idea of having various countries discuss what kind of permission is needed for global effects. Yes, but our projects are really much more local in their immediate effects. And there's no risk that, pumping some water out of any of these 4 places, is going to make a big difference 1,000 miles away, except in terms of the ocean rise. And so we understand the permissions in each of these places. For example, Iceland has a very formal system there, and other people have gotten permission to work there. In Alaska, some of the indigenous peoples have had bad experience with people working on glaciers, and they need to be brought in and understood. And with Antarctica, there's a treaty system, and they've already given permission, as Alex has said, to do drilling. And so it shouldn't be that hard to get another set of permissions. And so it's not the same thing as intervening on the atmosphere, which is really hard indefinite kind of permissions for that. So it's not that bad. And the Thwaites, luckily, it's the only segment of Antarctica that has no sovereign claims.
That
How convenient. Because that's possibly because it's so inhospitable.
just thinking about what could possibly go wrong, which is a good thing to think about with any of these sorts of ideas. I suppose if you drilled enough holes, you might cause the glacier to break up more rapidly and, slide into the ocean because you've broken it up. But that's one of the reasons why we want to get good, solid engineering data before any large-scale effort would be launched.
Well, are there engineers working at the level of actually, drawing, things on tables and numbers and dollar signs and things? Is there any practical level planning going on at this early stage on how, steps that you would take to do this, or to at least do your experiments?
Well, two answers. First of all, the answer is yes, there's effort going on to try to gather that data, or at least say what the data is we would need in order to make those calculations. But I have to point out that there has been drilling in the north forever for oil. And so people know how to do the drilling, know what the costs are. In our case, probably it's not nearly as expensive as drilling for oil, because all we're trying to do is pump the water out, not drill through rock to get to the oil. So those, we do have experienced sources of information to help us assess what the cost would be.
And Meta, let me just add in, we actually do have a pretty detailed plan. We actually would like to be on the ice next year and actually drill and pump water and take a whole series of measurements that all get fed into rather complex models. And so yes, there is plans, teams, equipment, technology is all sort of lined up. It's the funding and the permissions are the things that really are needed in order to go get this work started.
So the level of funding required to do engineering data gathering is not too terrible. It's on the order of, say, $10 million or in that range. Doing the actual project, to have the effect that we're interested in, of course, is potentially another much larger cost. But we won't know how to do that math until we get this solid data that we can use to model what the intervention would have to look like.
So if anybody listening in has ideas of where to get 10 million to retard ocean rise, let us know.
Well, don't you have any billionaire friends? I mean, surely the people out in Silicon Valley have money they don't know what to do with. So I I know some people who are doing work on climate repair, and they seem to be able to get hold of investors and so on. How have you got to that stage yet of going around with your begging bowl?
Well, yes, we have in small quantities. So far, the funding for this work has come from modest-sized donors. I'm one of them, but I'm not a billionaire. I do have a bunch of friends who are billionaires, but whether or not they're willing to spend their money on this depends a good deal on showing them the basic argument why this could work. And they made their billions of dollars by being fairly pragmatic about things. Many of them are engineers. And so if you don't come to them with a well thought through argument and solid data to justify it, they're not likely to open their purses.
Well, we do have a proposal.
Sorry.
We do have a proposal. We have a pitch deck, and we're effectively just starting that process now of reaching out to funders and trying to go ahead and get that funding. And so, icepreservation.org is a really generic launch pad to get info about us and get connected with us. And we are looking for people. I think philanthropic funding is the way to do this. Governments don't have this mindset or this mandate right now. It's too complex. And so I think in the early days, while we're trying to get this started, gather this information, I think philanthropic funding is definitely the way to do this.
Well, millions shouldn't be that hard. Billions is what you're going to need, though, in the long term, and that might be a bit more challenging.
That'll be after next year. So let's get through next year with our 10. And
you're planning on about a year for the research. Is that right?
Probably a few years, honestly, because it is seasonal. We'll gather, imagine there's 10 things that we need to learn. The first time we go out on the ice, we'll probably learn 6 of them, and then we'll probably learn a year following another 2, and then another 2. And then finally, once we have our 10 things worked out, we could have a real proposal, say, in let's say 2 to 3 years, where we could actually propose what it would look like going to Antarctica, and what is the probability of success, and what are the risks, and how many holes, how much energy, like all of those details that we're all very interested in learning. It'll probably take us 2 to 3 years of basic small level research to do in order to get to that big answer that we're all looking for.
And who all else is involved? This Atlantic article, I think it was the Atlantic, wasn't it?
Yes.
They named at least 20, well, it seemed to me about 20 researchers. They just dropped names right and left of people who are engaged in this. Is there any coordination or any consultation between groups of people who are interested in the same project, but maybe working independently? Have you been in touch with the people? I don't even remember the names, but we're going to be interviewing some of them not too far in the future. Do you have any contact with them, and are they coming to your meeting in Stanford or whatever?
We invited, well, remember the American Geophysical Union meeting last year in December was in San Francisco. We brought 40 glaciologists to our meeting at Stanford prior to that one. And there's another one coming up in September in New York. And we expect to have a number of people coming, looking at a different set of problems, not the specific theory of glacier dynamics. In this case, we're looking at governance and funding.
Mm-hmm.
Meta, let me just sort of maybe answer that. There's not a lot of people who are really looking at the intervention side. Most of the field, I think Vinton mentioned, of glaciology, Peter probably knows, was really looking at just analyzing, measuring how bad the problem is. And there's only very recently been the shift that says, hey, these are the people who actually have all the knowledge. Why don't they start to propose the solutions? They know what the problem is, so they're probably pretty well qualified to start getting some of these solutions on the table. So it's a relatively new group. We are in touch with many of them. We work very closely together. A lot of collaboration can and should be done. But that's exactly kind of what we all need to start doing. Let's keep our ideas moving. Let's stay coordinating and collaborating between us all and find the answer. The answer's out there. We just need to work together in order to go find it.
Peter, do you have any tips on people that you know, presumably a lot in academia, who have been doing research that these people should get acquainted?
Well, yes, I mean, there's you've already talked about the British Antarctic Survey, and that's a body which expends quite large amounts of money on similar problems to this one, and that could be something that would attract that maybe would attract people. You're thinking about who's going to pay to do this. It could be British Antarctic Survey is potentially they're sort of odd body, but they sometimes come through with very impressive pieces of work. So they might be worth going for.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a helpful suggestion. I am very close to being out of time, Meta, because I have another meeting coming in about 1.5 minutes.
Okay. Well, we do need to finish off, but I'm thinking of inviting people from various indigenous communities, especially in the North, who would be affected by this and whose consent needs to be solicited. So if anybody wants to have a conversation with some of those people, I'm working on organizing conversations like this. And if you want me to, I'll get back to you and invite you to join so that you can talk to them and persuade them that this is a worthwhile thing to do. Is that a good idea or not?
Well, certainly having knowledge of who to talk to is important to us. We have contacts with a number of indigenous groups that we think would be interested in, or perhaps even concerned about such an intervention, or even the experimentation that's needed to gather the data. So we're already beginning to talk to some of those
And the
groups.
person on our group that's most in touch with the Alaskans is Jenny Sukale at Stanford.
Okay, I will try to.
She should be there. Definitely have her on it.
How do you spell her last name?
Suckale.
Okay. Thank you. I will pursue those people, but I will also be very happy to stay in touch with what you're doing. Be kept apprised of what you've been doing and what you're going to do. And I certainly wish you all, I would be out there urging you to start doing it, you know, but I know that's not judicious. So thank you all.
Well, thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Good wishes for this. And I hope you make it before the tipping points. Okay.
Boy, as do we.
Okay. Thank